Likkutei Sichos, Chelik Chav Gimel, Volume 23, the third Sicha for Parshas Ba'aloischa. This Sicha will discuss the topic of Nevuah, prophecy, and what, according to the opinion of the Rambam, needs to be the fundamental belief or an awareness of each and every Jew on this matter as a fundamental part of our faith as a Jew. Something to familiarize ourselves with before we get into it. Number one, why this topic? Because towards the end of the Parsha, we have the discussion of Nevuah in general, about prophecy and the 70 prophets and so on, and then in particular, the exclusivity, the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah, and the fact that he was Anav Mikol HaAdam, that he was most humble from all people to ever live. To familiarize ourselves better and to have a better appreciation as we flow through this Sicha. So first of all, the Rambam, in his Pirush HaMishnayos, that's the commentary to Mishnah, on Maseches Sanhedrin, Tractate Sanhedrin, Perek Chelek, which is the 10th chapter, he has a whole long discussion about the principles of faith that every Jew has to believe in, what really is the fundamentals of Judaism, and he breaks it down basically into a list of 13, thus the 13 principles of faith. Now, there's another book that also discusses this, a very famous one. It's called Sefer HaIkrim, or Ikarim. Now, Ikar means fundamental. Again, the book of the fundamentals. In this book, which was written by Rabbi Yosef Albo and was printed in about 1480, in this book, he actually contests some of his predecessors and their list of fundamentals, their list of principles of faith, and he has a different approach, as we'll see in the Sicha. So let's go into the Sicha. The Rambam, in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, which is the laws of the fundamentals of the Torah. This is in the beginning of his monumental work, the Mishnah Torah, which is a Sefer Halachos, which is a book of halachos, how every Jew is supposed to conduct their lives, and spans and covers all laws of the Torah. So in the beginning of chapter 7, where he introduces the basic principles, the basic fundamentals that a Jew needs to follow and believe in, he says as follows: from the fundamentals of our faith is to know that Hashem conveys prophecy to people, to human beings. And this prophecy is bestowed only on somebody that's a very wise sage, somebody that's strong in their character traits, never overcome by his natural inclinations, by his Yetzer Hara, ever, and that rather he exhibits a strong mental capacity to control his instincts, his Yetzer Hara. This is basically how the Rambam describes what are the criterion for a prophet, for one to be a prophet. And notice that he says this is mi yesodei hadas, this is from the fundamentals of our faith. Afterwards, he goes on describing the individual prophet, what he needs to do or she needs to do in order to actually prophesize. Now, the commentaries ask the obvious question. When you look into sources, which obviously the Rambam didn't make this up, it comes from somewhere, you go to Maseches Nedarim, Tractate Nedarim in the Talmud, on page 38a, which discusses the criterion for Nevius, for prophecy. And over there it says as follows, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu rests his Shechina only, exclusively on somebody who is a Gibor, who is mighty, rich, wise, humble. And it says over there that all of them we actually learn out from Moshe, because Moshe Rabbeinu had all these qualities. Now from this it comes out, if you read the Talmud, that when it says Gibor, when it says somebody mighty, it means literally the physical sense, somebody who's strong physically. That's what's implied in the Talmud. And when it says rich, it doesn't mean rich in mitzvahs, it means literally rich. So the question now becomes, ask these commentaries, why is it that the Rambam doesn't mention anything about being rich, doesn't mention anything about being a strong, healthy person, and also doesn't even mention this criterion of being humble, which, at least, if you think about it, that's what Moshe Rabbeinu has. We have a very clear source for it in our parsha. Now, the only thing he does really seem to mention is the idea of being strong, of being mighty, but more in a metaphoric sense, in a symbolic sense, when he says that one is able to be stronger than his inclinations. But he doesn't quote it, he doesn't list the things that the Talmud lists. Now, there are those commentaries that try to explain as follows. That saying in the Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan, in the Tractate Nedarim, which we just quoted, that we must say that the Rambam holds that is not the halacha, meaning he doesn't paskin sol halacha. And therefore, in order to be a Navi, in order to have prophecy, one need not be rich or mighty, very extremely strong physically, and so on. And we have a proof. The fact is that there were, if you look through the history, there were many prophets that were not strong at all, and certainly were not rich. In fact, there's a story quoted in several places in the Talmud, for example, in Sanhedrin, in Saita, that the Gemara tells us a story that once the sages were sitting and they heard a heavenly voice which said, quote, "There is one here, there is a person amongst you who is fit that the Shekhinah should rest on him, just like Moshe Rabbeinu. However, the generation, meaning the people, are not worthy of it, they're not merititious enough, and therefore it's not so." And it says in the Talmud that they all, quote, look towards, they all put their eyes, literally, on Hillel HaZaken, the famous Hillel. Now, we all know that Hillel was actually famous for the fact that he was extremely poor. In fact, the story how he became a student of Shmaya Italian, and so on and so forth, he was extremely poor. And therefore, you can prove from this that the halacha obviously stands that you don't have to be rich in order to be a prophet, because here it said, the heavenly voice said that he potentially is a prophet. But still the question remains, okay, you don't have to be rich, you don't have to be strong and mighty physically, but still the idea of being humble seems to fit very much as a virtuous thing to have, as a virtuous character trait to have, in order to be a prophet, in order to be that person through whom Hashem transmits his messages. Why didn't the Rambam quote it? And in fact, if you look at our parsha, as I mentioned before, it seems that when the Torah speaks about the exclusivity, the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy, it first prefaces it by saying, "Va'ish Moshe anav mi'od mikol ha'adam asher pnei ha'adama," that Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble of all men living on the face of the earth, and then it continues saying, here it is, his prophecy is unsurpassed, is unmatched by any other prophets. Why didn't the Rambam quote this, at least as one of in the list, the short list that he has, of the criterion for a prophet? The answer in all this explanation is as follows. In the 13 principles that the Rambam writes, what does he write in the sixth one of these principles? The sixth principle he writes, quote, and it is that a person must know that there are amongst the human beings some select individuals who have this great, they naturally have this great refined character and a great wholeness that it makes them fit. It makes their souls are fit, that they are able to receive, to the form of that they're able to receive the intellect, that they have such a great fit spiritual pureness that they're able to accept this intellect. And afterwards he explains that the human intellect cleaves to the active intellect. That means this person who's so refined, who has this natural disposition of being on such a high refined level, and that this human intellect cleaves to the active intellect, meaning the intellect of Hashem, so to speak, and it emanates lofty emanations to him, thus the idea of the prophecy. And then Raman concludes, this is what prophecy is, this is what the prophets basically experience. Now, it's obvious that the Rambam is not here to tell us a story. The Rambam is not just about, describing to us very interesting facts, FYIs about Nevuah, but rather, as this is the list, according to the Rambam, of the principles, the fundamentals of our faith, he's telling us what we, quote, need to know. As he says, man needs to know that this exists, meaning that it's not enough, it's not sufficient in the 13 principles of faith to just know in general that there's such a concept of prophecy, that we have to believe in it, but rather we have to know the manner or the status of the nevuah, what it is, exactly how it is. And therefore the Rambam tells us that this is connected to the da'as, to the intellect, to the knowledge of the person, the knowledge of the prophet, that then his da'as connects to the da'as, so to speak, of Hashem, of the lofty presence, and that becomes the da'as of the Navi. And as he describes, that when the Navi actually experiences prophecy, then all his limbs, his entire body becomes weak, and he kind of starts to have like an out-of-body experience, in the sense that he doesn't feel his body anymore, meaning his body is no longer there as a distraction, as a distortion, and he connects purely to his mind, where through his mind is being channeled in nevuah. And according to this, we can appreciate and understand why the Rambam lists the criteria that he lists and not more. In other words, we can answer the question. Because all these things that he lists, they are connected to the fundamentals of what we need to know what prophecy is all about. The bottom line? That it's connected to his das. And that's why he explained. In other words, the Rambam is not out to teach us he's not out to list, his objective is not to list to us all the criteria that a Navi has to possess, but rather to tell us what we need to know in terms of the fundamental of our faith, the principles of our emunah, the ikrim, as he calls it, what it is that we need to know about the Nevuah. And that is how the Navi, how the prophet experiences prophecy. Not to tell us what he needs to be as an individual, that he needs to be strong, that he needs to be rich, that he needs to be humble. Not that. Just to tell us what happens. What is the fundamental? What is really the most crucial that we need to know in terms of prophecy? And that is that it's connected to his mind, and that it channels through his mind. And therefore, what we need to know is that he has to have optimal intellect, the purest optimal intellect, and most optimal character. That's what counts. And according to this, we'll also understand and appreciate another wonderful thing. The Sefer HaIkrim, which we introduced in the introduction, he explains why, according to his opinion, meaning the Sefer HaIkrim's opinion, Torah min hashamayim is an ikar, meaning knowing that the Torah comes from heaven, comes directly from Hashem, Torah is divine. That is a fundamental and a principle according to the Ikrim. However, the concept of Nevuah, says the Sefer HaIkrim, the idea that there is prophecy, that's only like a subcategory of this principle. And he explains, because he says the Nevuah, prophecy, is not in order for people to know new things or to get some kind of messages or see some kind of wondrous things happen. That's not what it's about. Rather, he explains, since the whole objective, the whole purpose of prophecy is in order that there should be a direct message from Hashem to mankind, which is basically Torah min hashamayim. It's in order to convey to them messages regarding what they need to do, how they need to do it, teach them, enlighten them. That's the sum total, that's Torah. And therefore, according to the Ikrim, he argues with the Rambam, and he says it shouldn't be in separate categories, but rather it's all one category. There's the idea of believing that Torah is from heaven. I'm just repeating, Torah is from heaven. And as part of that, as a subcategory of that, there is the idea of prophecy, which is one of the means through which Hashem channels Torah from heaven. So according to this, we need to understand. The Rambam himself also seems to agree with this idea. The Rambam says that when the Torah says, quote, Navi mikerev Navi akim lahem mikerev achecha kamaycha, that when Hashem said to Moshe, I will establish a Navi, a prophet for them from amongst their brethren. And says the Rambam, what does this mean? What is the purpose? Says the Rambam, this is not in order to introduce some kind of new laws or a new religion. or anything new. Rather, it is to come and to command them, to enhance them on the words of Torah, and to warn them that they should not chas v'sholom transgress. In other words, the Rambam also seems to agree with the notion of the Sefer HaIkrim, that the purpose, the goal, the objective of Nevuah is in order to enhance the people's knowledge and awareness, and therefore fulfillment of Torah. So why is it that the Rambam himself, who obviously holds that all the 13 principles are, as they're called, principles, each one is another principle. True, they're all equally principles of the Torah. However, the fact that the Rambam lists them in a certain order is telling that according to the Rambam, there is obviously a more important principle, or there's a principle that has the absolute priority, and then there is something that comes after it. And of course, according to this, the question is, according to the Rambam's own words that we just quoted, in which he seems to agree with the Sefer HaIkrim, why is it that the Ikar, that the principle regarding Nevuah, which we have been discussing in the Sikha, is principle number 6. Principle number 7 is regarding Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah, that is the top Nevuah, the top prophecy. And only after that does he discuss the principles regarding the Torah, that Torah is from Sinai, that Torah is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from Hashem, and that and another principle, the Torah will never ever be changed, that it's always going to be the same Torah. Torah is what it is, and it will never be altered in any way. Why? If the Rambam agrees in the idea that the Ikrim writes, then if anything, first he should have discussed Torah, and then, as another principle, he should have mentioned the idea of prophecy. But here we see no. First he discusses prophecy as a principle, which seems to put it earlier in the line of importance, of priority. Only afterwards does he discuss the principle of Torah. And another question. Why, going back to the Sefer of Mishnah Torah, which is a book of laws, right? Where the Rambam is telling us how a Jew has to live his life according to Torah, according to halacha. Why is it important to know, as a halacha in Hilchas Yesodei HaTorah, that Hashem gives nevuah to a person? This is from the principles of faith, quote unquote, in the words of the Rambam. Why wouldn't it suffice to just say, we are obligated by Jewish law to listen to the Navi? That's it. Why is it important to say, why is he saying that according to Jewish law, we're obligated to know, to be aware that God gives prophecy to the person, and then mention the fact that we have to listen to and follow the Navi's words? According to what we explained before, when we explained what is really the principle according to the Rambam, what we really need to believe in when it comes to prophecy, we have the answer. The answer is as follows. The revelation of prophecy to the prophets is in a manner that the prophet becomes connected and united with the word of Hashem. Remember we said about the mind, about his das being connected, so to speak, to the lofty das of Hashem. And thus it communicates through his intellect, it communicates through his mind, and from there he has the awareness of the nevuah. And like the Rambam says, in his own words, that the word of Hashem becomes absorbed literally in their intellect, in their appreciation. They see it in a vision of emunah, like in their imagination, in their mind, and then it transmits to their thoughts and then to their speech. And as this is explained and stressed in the Rambam, and also explained in Kabbalah and Chassidus. So we have a better appreciation why, and in fact says that an interesting thing. If you want to really break it down, Nevuah has 3 aspects to it. Prophecy has 3 aspects. There's number 1, there's the aspect, as we said, the Torah. As we just quoted before, that the purpose of the Hashem says through Moshe, I'm going to establish a prophet for them to teach them the words of Torah. Then there is another aspect of Nevuah, number 2, which is like a self-standing mitzvah in itself. And it becomes even one of the 630 mitzvahs, which is Elav Tishmon. Hashem says you have to follow the words of the Navi. But then there is a third aspect which according to the Rambam and according to what we explain, this is from the principles of our faith. This is a fundamental aspect of our faith, which is to know, and I'm stressing the word, to know that Hashem gives prophecy to people, of course, those who are receptacles for it, meaning that Hashem reveals himself to mankind, and that how does this happen? The person to whom Hashem reveals himself becomes connected to Hashem, becomes unified with Hashem, becomes one with Hashem through their intellect. And of course, what is the highest level of this nevuah, of this phenomena? Of course, it's the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. And of course, now we can appreciate why the Rambam lists things the way he lists it, and why he lists it the way he does in the Sefer, in Hilchos Yesod HaTorah and the Sefer of Mishnah Torah. You see, the Rambam brings these principles, 6 and 7, regarding prophecy in general, and in the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, right after the first 5 principles, in which he discusses in detail the principles of what we have to believe in. Believe in one God and believe there's no other God, and how we have to cleave to Hashem and never go away from Hashem. Now this fits in with that. This is part of that, because the idea of serving God, the idea of believing in the unity of God, fits in, and part of it is the idea of prophecy, like according to the Rambam's declaration, according to the way the Rambam explains it, according to how we explained it in this Sikha, that it's actually one and the same. That the Navi becomes unified with Hashem. We become unified, albeit in a very distant manner, when we do our mitzvahs and so on. But the Navi, who is such a refined level, as the Rambam said, he has these great qualities, he's able to become actually one with Hashem. And that's why we have to listen to him. This is another aspect of the unity of Hashem. And then, of course, we can appreciate why in Hilchos Yesod HaTorah, why in Halacha, the Rambam tells us that not only that we have to listen to the Navi, but he stresses the fact that we have to know what the Nevi'us is all about. Because knowing this is, again, a continuation of what he discussed prior to this, and that is the fundamentals of the Torah, to know about the existence of Hashem. And to know that Hashem, quote, reveals the secrets to mankind, and that it has a direct effect on the world. Where is the direct effect? That the Navi and Hashem, so to speak, become one in their minds when the Nevuah is being transmitted to him.